Would you dare plunge down a cave and risk your life, only to become the first human to access these majestic underground cathedrals no one has seen? Before we dive into the video, I'd like to ask for your support by subscribing to our channel. Currently, only 8% of our viewers are subscribed, but your subscription helps us create more content like this. Simply click the subscribe button, like this video, and hit the bell icon to stay updated on our latest uploads. Most people won't do it, right? But some curious souls wander to great depths to achieve greater heights of success. This particular expedition was one of a kind, a telltale of resistance and perseverance. You wouldn't believe what the end holds for you. We invest our utmost efforts into bringing you stories of unbelievable real-life incidents. In this video, we're going to share cave diving accidents which cause tragic outcomes that you wouldn't believe could ever happen. Again, we try our best to bring you well-researched informational content. If you want to support us, please take a second to click to subscribe. This will support and motivate us to bring valuable content right to your fingertips. Pannikin Plains of Australia. Australia has a wealth of fascinating cave systems, with approximately 6,500 caves spread throughout the continent. Deep below the Australian outback are some of the Earth's largest and most mysterious cave systems. The Nullarbor Plain is situated on the edge of the Great Australian Bight at the Western Australia and South Australia border. It sits on top of the largest piece of limestone bedrock in the world, which seems to stretch forever and is dotted with caves. The Pannikin Plains system is one of many such caving systems that lie below the Nullarbor Plain. The entrance to Pannikin Plains Cave is nothing more than a small hole in the desert. Above the surface lies a vast, treeless desert on the western and south Australian borders. However, beneath lies a massive cave system with vast subterranean caverns and underground passages partially filled with water lakes. It is one of the most extended, most profound underwater cave systems in the world. Diving into the center of the Earth to a depth of almost 3.5 kilometers vertically down into one of the most complex caving systems in the world nearly killed Andrew Wight. But it also opened up a new world of opportunity. You want to know how it happened? Let's dive back into the past. The Pannikin Plains Caving Expedition, 1988. Andrew Wight. Expert cave diver Andrew Wight led a 15-person expedition to the Pannikin Plains system from Adelaide in 1988 with the intention of selling the spectacular footage to recoup some of their costs. Wight brought in an underwater camera crew to accompany the party. His team consisted of world-class cave divers, scientists, and technicians, who, at that point, already held the world record for the longest underwater cave dive at 3.5 kilometers. They embarked on the expedition and were determined to explore the furthest reaches of the Pannikin Plains caves. Such adventures test the limits of human endurance, and they were up for the task ahead. The team, being the first people to venture that far into the geological wonder, could also conduct a series of scientific studies in conjunction with the University of Sydney. This was being carried out in correspondence with Dr. Julia James, who led the university researchers. She was then a senior lecturer in inorganic chemistry and a world-renowned authority on cave minerals, atmospheres, and water. She explained that scientists and cave explorers had always enjoyed a close relationship on the Nullarbor Plain and regarded this specific expedition as the Everest of cave diving. This was one step further in discovering and collecting underwater samples and specimens. She explained, quote, "These are critical samples that nobody in the world has yet collected and should give precious information about how those caves on the Nullarbor formed." Inherent risks associated with cave diving. Cave diving can be directly compared to scaling a monumental peak, as both involve facing deadly dangers and ambiguity at every turn. In effect, cave divers face more risks as they venture deep down around unknown hidden territory, reassessing their route plans as and when they crop up. Oxygen tanks, regulators, and other equipment are their lifeline, If anything happens to malfunction hundreds of feet down from the surface, catastrophe is bound to hit with an absolute death sentence. According to Wight, the golden rule for a cave diver is to always bring a spare air supply in case something goes wrong with the primary one. After all, there is no such thing as a quick ascent when you're deep down submerged in a cave. He stated, in fact, quote, "If you're a diver with a single tank and a single regulator and something fails, you're going to die." The water in these cave lakes is crystal clear, and diving therein is likened to floating in space. But the slightest hit on any surface could blind the diver, filling the entire passage with silt. Similarly, carrying 3 torches to light the way in case 1 or even 2 fail out is always recommended. Then, there is always the risk of decompression sickness caused by divers breathing air at a higher pressure underwater, also known as the bends. The doctors back then warned Wight that one of the divers may get killed or get the bend so severely that they would have to suffer for the rest of their lives. Nevertheless, the team was head-bent on completing the mission and defied the experts by the end of it. They knew with certainty that significant risks were involved in such an isolated diving expedition, but also there were rewards too. Their torches would be the first ones to light up the submerged, massive cathedrals and natural formations for the first time in history. Wight and his team knew the risks, but they had been meticulously working and planning everything contingently in detail for weeks. Even though one can be fully prepared, who knows when Mother Nature will have a final trick up her sleeve. Setting up the camp and the expedition. After reaching the site, it took 3 days to set up camp at the Pannikin Plains. The 5-ton gear was slowly and carefully lowered down the cave's mouth into the lake room. This equipment was sufficient to take them anywhere further up to 6 kilometers down the passage. It used to take more than a kilometer underwater to reach the so-called Concord Landing, a vast underground air chamber 4 landings high and the length of several football fields. This was where they set up their final base camp. From that point onwards, the divers ventured into previously unexplored passages, floating through untouched landscapes where no human being had ever been before. They would explore different paths leading to further caverns and air-filled chambers. High on adrenaline, exploring new venues, not knowing what treasures would be discovered, taking any new turn where every dive presents a new challenge and new opportunities. After 3 weeks, the team had their final meeting at the surface camp, at which point they decided to go for a final dive into the Pannikin Plains and explore whether a passage that they had recently discovered continued. The dive was successful, and so deep that they reached a dead end where the passage was further blocked by boulders. They returned to the lake room to join the rest of the team. It was the final day of a month-long expedition, and Wight and the rest of the 15-member group had pushed themselves to the limit to explore this subterranean world. It was now time to go back home, and they started packing up their gear. But one cannot plan for everything beforehand. Once-in-a-decade massive storm. When everything was about to wind up smoothly, Mother Nature delivered an unexpected surprise. While Andrew Wight and the team were gearing up to leave the cave, a massive storm was building to unleash its wrath upon the desert. It began dumping rain onto the desert, 2 years' worth in a total of 45 minutes, along with hail the size of golf balls and winds up to 100 kilometers an hour. Then, like bathwater in a plug hole, the deluge, estimated at about 300 million liters, found the entrance to the caves. The earth began to shift, soaking and losing the rock until it collapsed and buried the cave neck under hundreds of tons of avalanche of rubble. The 15-person team was on their way up to leave the cave when disaster struck. They had to run for their lives back down the cave as their only way out disappeared in a deafening rumble. Two team members, Andrew Wight and Vicky Bonwick, were the furthest ahead of their team, and they got stuck on a ledge the size of a small kitchen table between the rushing water and the fragile, shifting roof of the cave. Wight later recalled the situation as, quote, "The inner workings of the cave had rearranged themselves. We were stuck between the raging water and an ever-diminishing space between the roof and us." They faced a difficult decision: to stay put and pray that the roof wouldn't cave in until the rescue team reached them, or to run for freedom, risking being hit by the flooding boulders. The only way out was to climb up a rope through the jumbles of rock blocking the entrance. After 5 hours of perching precariously on the ledge with no change in circumstance, Wight decided to take his chances. He says, quote, "Vicky was catatonic, accepting our fate. I was more resistant and finally said, we're going to have to do something. Running for it with the risk of being skittled by a boulder is better than letting the roof come down on our heads." They swam, climbed, and wriggled their way through crevices and back to the surface to safety. Wight then called the cavalry and led a 27-hour rescue mission that finally managed to locate and extract the rest of the expedition. One of the team members, Ron Allum, built a radio transmission device during the planning and initiating phase of the expedition. The device was capable of transmitting through solid rock and made communication possible with the surface team throughout the expedition. The device became a savior as Wight established contact with the remaining 13 members entombed beneath Pannikin Plains. They began to formulate and coordinate the escape plan. While those on the surface vigorously worked and aligned the rescue mission, those entrapped beneath were busy rationing their food and water. They remained perseverant and upbeat in the face of such a disastrous situation. The team was determined to risk all odds and climb the unstable rock falls to safety. They were gradually led up, one by one, crossing the ever-precarious distance of hundreds of meters through the line boulders to the surface. Miraculously, all 15 made their way out, unharmed and uninjured. Access to Pannikin Plains was restricted. After all of it happened, from the storm to the collapse and the consequent rescue, access was closed for everyone due to the fragility of the unstable rock formation, which threatened to collapse further without warning. The cave was deemed unsafe for diving, hence the authorities' decision to close it down. The positive after effects. Some curious twists of fate define a person's life and decisions. One such twist was Wight's decision to arrange a cameraman to document the Pannikin Plains expedition. As the last person extracted from the cave, the cameraman, Wes Skiles, captured the last footage of the collapse and the dramatic rescue, which was later turned into a gripping documentary titled Nullarbor Dreaming. The documentary captured the attention of many Hollywood celebrities. And who would have thought that it would hook the royalty James Cameron himself? This was when Cameron was still several years behind in releasing a blockbuster like Titanic. Nevertheless, the incident sparked a friendship between Cameron, Wight, and Allum, opening many doors to never-ending opportunities. Wight collaborated with Cameron on his 3D documentaries Ghosts of the Abyss and Aliens of the Deep. Wight became a successful movie producer, working on 45 films, mostly ocean exploration-related documentaries. The Cameron-Wight friendship eventually led to the making of Sanctum. Wight also co-wrote that 2011 hit film loosely based on the Pannikin Plains expedition. James Cameron's name is attached as the movie's executive producer, which made it a blockbuster worldwide, garnering raving success and collecting more than $100 million at the global box office. New developments at Pannikin Plains. A team of skilled, highly experienced, and well-equipped divers recently got permits to enter the Pannikin Plain Caves in 2018, since its last closure to public access ever since the 1988 expedition. The purpose of undertaking this expedition was scientific research and to explore and find another giant ongoing cave tunnel. The team explored further and found sumps. By the way, sumps are water-filled sections of the dry cave. They dived down and they emerged into a small room with restrictions ahead. The team pushed through the limits, only to find 3 more passages on the other side. They planned to explore these passages further, but due to COVID-19 pandemic restrictions, their plans couldn't be realized until 2023. They undertook the expedition and they took risks to find other secret passages, but unfortunately they couldn't find the Holy Grail that they went looking for.
The fresh air and warm weather of springtime brought one couple to California's Miramontes Point. They enjoyed plush hotels, vast cliffs, sandy beaches, and the open ocean, until they decided to step inside a coastal cave beneath the bluffs. They lost track of time and suddenly found themselves trapped by raging water. Rescue teams brought helicopters and boats to save them as the tides continued to rise. Find out if they made it out alive as we explore the unique dangers of the Miramontes Point Coastal Cave. The Coastal Cave at Miramontes Point rests at the edge of California's Half Moon Bay. Half Moon Bay was founded as a farming town back in the 1840s, and today it's turned into a small city with a population of roughly 12,000. The town is surrounded by gorgeous parks and the seemingly endless expanse of the Pacific Ocean. The ocean collides with the rocky coastline, spraying water into the air. The wind across the ocean sweeps up the coastline, dragging the water particles with it to shroud the town in fog. This fog notoriously attracted smugglers to Half Moon Bay, who used it as a major port for exporting liquor during Prohibition. Miramontes Point is sandwiched between the Ritz-Carlton and a beach. The Ritz-Carlton is a luxury hotel and resort that provides wealthy patrons with a plush 5-star experience. The resort's golf course stretches across the bluffs, which limits visitors from the view on that side of Miramontes Point, but at least the flat grass doesn't further obstruct the view. This hotel is a popular destination for couples who want to celebrate their weddings or anniversaries in comfort, surrounded by the unique landscape that only California's coast can provide. The other side of Miramontes Point leads down to the Three Rocks Beach, which attracts hikers, cavers, and travelers, including one couple in May of 2020 who got so caught up in the beauty of the area that they nearly lost their lives. This couple visited Half Moon Bay to bask in the warm sun while the ocean waves serenaded them as they celebrated their love for one another. The pair walked down to the beach and saw the 60-foot bluffs of Miramontes Point extending overhead like the awning of a cathedral. Along the beach, they found knurled driftwood and small shells that painted little splotches of color along the smooth sand. Summers in California can be swelteringly hot, which would have ruined their vacation. Many travelers consider going out west for the winter to beat the cold back home, but even without heavy snowfall and ice, the winter weather has a strange effect on beachgoers and fans of coastal caves. Changes in the Earth's rotation and the weather creates higher than normal tides, which cuts the 1.5-mile beach trail in half. On low tide, the soft, sandy beach extends for hundreds of feet as shelves of foamy waves gently roll forward, causing mist to rise up into the hills and trees of the coast. After an early dinner, they walked along the Three Rocks Beach as the gentle tides covered their tracks behind them. Down the way, they saw a hole in the bluffs and went to check it out. As they approached, the beach narrowed into a thin strip. They realized they were looking at a coastal cave, and curiosity got the best of them. They carefully tried to walk along the tightrope coastline to avoid water splashing them, but the sandy ground was now so narrow they couldn't avoid splashes from incoming waves. Unsettled by the water but undeterred, they kept walking and entered the cave. Coastal caves have many unique features for splunkers, and they're usually safer for regular folk who wouldn't normally dare to venture into an underground labyrinth. Coastal caves can contain unique ocean life like starfish, barnacles, and sometimes even rare deep-sea monsters can find themselves stranded on the shores outside of California's coastal caves. This cave is one of many that continue to dot the shores for miles south of the city. That night, they could have continued walking to wider sections of the beach, or gone back to enjoy glasses of wine and comfortable robes. But instead, they felt sheltered by the strong arched stone overhead. Even though the beach is vast and the view is endless, there's almost always people in view. Inside the cave, they could relax as if they were back home. The pair sat side by side, admiring the beauty of the sunset over the ocean. The sounds of endless city traffic were far, far away, but the relaxing ocean became a shouting chorus as they lost track of time. Before they knew it, the water was at their feet, and even the low tide didn't leave the mouth of the cave. They were trapped inside the Miramontes Point cave. The couple was confused. They saw the high tide earlier. There shouldn't be another high tide until tomorrow, and this time the water level was far higher than they saw earlier. No storms were overhead either. Their confusion and disbelief added to their fear as they clung to each other and prayed to be rescued. Little did they know, multiple factors influenced the tide, but their mistake could easily happen to almost anyone. Coastlines that only have one high and low tide each day follow the diurnal tide pattern, and semi-diurnal tides have 2 cycles per day. It's no surprise the vacationers were used to diurnal and semi-diurnal tides because almost every shore on the planet follows these predictable patterns. For example, almost all of Europe, Africa, and over half of the eastern coast of the Americas all follow this pattern. Semi-diurnal tides are very consistent both in their frequency and the overall water levels they produce. But unlike the eastern U.S., the California coast can have multiple high and low tides per day in what's known as a mixed tide. Squeezing more cycles into a 24-hour window shortens the length of each low and high tide, which could lull beachgoers or coastal cave explorers into a false sense of security. Visitors to mixed tide beaches cannot rely on the water level from earlier in the day to predict future high tides, since each mixed tide can bring much more water than the last. One of them tried to remain calm, suggesting that someone would notice their absence and rescuers would see their footprints. That trail would be a clear indicator they were stranded inside the cave, since a pair of prints went into the cave, but there was no trail leading out of the cave and no trail heading the opposite way. But the other partner grimly pointed and looked out in horror. The thin beach was completely submerged, covering their tracks and leaving no trace of where they had gone. They weren't wrong about their first observation. One of the employees at the nearby hotel noticed their absence. They never arrived at their dinner reservation. The employee informed additional staff until the message made it to a lifeguard who looked down the beach. The sunlight was only a small sliver over the ocean, which made it hard to see anything against the foggy cliffs. With his hand cupped to his ear, he heard a faint sound cutting through the waves. Screams of terror. The guard called 911, and Half Moon Bay's emergency crews raced to the bluffs. The beach was almost completely gone all along the coastline. They had to park by a road near the top of one of the ledges. Firefighters were the first to arrive. They were joined by the Coastside Fire Protection District at 9:15 p.m. The rescue teams called down to the couple to assess their condition. The pair was frightened by the rising water, pushing them closer to the ceiling and closer to drowning in a whirlpool of water slamming into the rock. They weren't confident in their abilities, but they wanted to get out now. They asked if they could swim to safety, but they were advised to stay inside the cave. The vicious tide was strongest at nightfall, and the undercurrent could pull them below the waters, drowning them or sending them bobbing into the open ocean with no hope of being found in time. To make matters worse, the cave's stone walls sapped the heat from the area, leaving the air chilly as the water got colder and colder. The pair was physically fine for now, but if crews didn't act fast, the water could get too cold for them to hang on to any rescue attempts. Night fell over the quaint bay area as many of the town's inhabitants were unaware of the danger unfolding at Miramontes Point. The darkness shrouding the beach complicated the mission. Caves are always pitch black no matter what time of day rescuers venture inside, but there are confined spaces where handheld lights can cover the job. Headlamps wouldn't cut it here. The raging tides could easily splash and block or distort the light, and anyone attempting to rescue them would be in constant motion. During the extraction, rescuers would have to face the other direction to swim away or climb, leaving the stranded couple in the dark. The rescuers would need to look back to check on the couple, leaving themselves exposed to dangers in front of them. And if anything happened to the trapped would-be cavers, the rescuers wouldn't see it in time to react. The firefighters and the growing rescue party on the cliff called for backup from ocean units, and the Pillar Point Harbor Master sent their own rescue vehicle to the scene. The California Highway Patrol lent their helicopter to aid the rescue mission as well. The air and water vehicles shined their massive 1,600-watt searchlights onto the cliffs. With the searchlight beams that could travel up to a mile away, rescuers could finally see the situation to plan the rescue. Although the waters were high enough to drown the cave-trapped couple, they were too shallow for the Coast Guard to approach the shore for a rescue by sea. Helicopters can be used for cave rescues, especially on mountains, but this one wasn't equipped to handle these extraction missions. Rescuers would need a special safety system, secured ropes, and multiple harnesses to perform a helicopter rescue, so they needed to come up with a new plan. Rescuers also had to spitball ideas on how to tackle the problem of the cold water. Normally, cave rescuers would use a harness or a stretcher to safely lift victims up and out of caves. That way, people don't have to expend any more energy. Usually, by the time cave rescuers reach the target, the subjects are too tired or hurt to move. Plus, most rescues happen to inexperienced cavers. These are splunkers who couldn't handle the physical challenges of the caves on their own, and it would be irresponsible and dangerous to expect them to pull their own weight after they already needed help. As long as they make it out alive, they can always train and try again later. But this cave presented new challenges to the rescuers. The coastal community lacked the equipment needed for traditional cave rescues. Without the proper equipment, they would have to rely on Coast Guard rescue methods, which place more responsibility on the people being rescued. They had to act fast, because the strange semi-diurnal tide wasn't the only factor influencing the water levels. The tide continued to rise as rescuers debated their course of action because of the rising moon. The moon heavily impacts sea level and the cycle of tides. Tides will be at their peak during the sublunar point when the moon passes directly over that side of the planet, while the lowest tides occur perpendicular to the high tides. So, the closer the moon is to the surface, the higher the tides will be. And the high tides on one side create a wave around the planet so that the opposite side of Earth also has high tide. These sublunar points can change depending on the moon's cycle. The moon is closest to the Earth at a point called its perigee, and this creates what's known as a supermoon, which is much larger in the sky. Since the moon is closest to the planet at its perigee, the tides will be at their highest cyclic point during this event. The pair were trapped in the cave on Thursday, May 8, 2020, the night of the supermoon. By the time the first emergency crews made it to the scene, the water was already 2 feet higher than it was at the previous high tide. Rescue teams decided they would need to rely on a single swimmer to rescue both of the trapped explorers. They simply couldn't wait for additional experts to arrive. One slip from the inside of the cave could lead to death, and the supermoon-fueled tide was still rising. The swimmer was a trained rescuer, but even the strongest and most talented rescuers can be swept away by the tide or crushed by the undercurrent. To provide this brave hero with support, the fire crew attached a rope system on the top of the bluff and let it down the side of the cliff. The rope would be too unstable for the cavers to climb, but the swimmer could attach to it for his, her, or their own safety. By 9:45 p.m., only 30 minutes after the first crews scrambled to Miramontes Point, the water level had risen almost 5 feet above the low tide earlier in the day. In spite of all the challenges, the rescue moved lightning fast, and crews were ready to begin the extraction. The swimmer cut through the water, unfazed by water splashing through their nostrils and the salt stinging their eyes. They reached the inside of the cave and paused to catch their breath. The water inside the cave was even more dangerous than the tide smashing against the bluffs. The water swirled around, making it almost impossible to swim in a straight line. But this swimmer was molded by the waves. One at a time, the rescuer summoned all the strength of a tugboat and pulled them through the surging waters. The couple was shaken, but unharmed, thanks to the fast-thinking and brave efforts of the Half Moon Bay rescue team. This story is a reminder for anyone exploring the beaches or delving into oceanic caves. Always check the weather and prepare with emergency first aid just in case. Tide charts are also usually available to alert travelers of the dangers behind the beautiful facade of the world's beaches. Park rangers also patrol the shores, and they can give helpful tips as well. So remember that over-preparing beats being caught off guard, and even the most pristine nature spots can quickly turn deadly, especially when they involve cave. Have you ever noticed how supermoons affect the ocean? What are some of the best beaches you've visited? And do you have any tips for others who may want to travel there as well? Share your thoughts and stories in the comments, and tap that like button if you enjoyed this video. Subscribe for more cave rescue stories that you'll have to see to believe.